Hello and welcome to the Fully Charged Show podcast. I'm Helen Charsky. This week on the podcast, we're going to be talking about solar energy and a scheme for connecting US citizens to getting at solar energy, which isn't as simple as it sounds, and also a little bit about the public mood on solar in the US. I was talking to Aviv Shalgi, and he's the CEO of a company called Solar Simplified. It's actually a very young company, just about a year old, and it's a software company designed to connect two parts of a large energy supply system. And the idea is ultimately to increase solar capacity in America. And it's easy to assume that if renewables are cheaper, which they do tend to be, then big companies already have an incentive to build them. That sounds sensible. But it turns out that life is a bit more complicated than that. And Aviv thinks he has a way to join the dots. So here's the podcast.
My Energy is putting the I back into British innovation. My Energy is putting the I back into inventing the future. My Energy is putting the I back into inspiring a nation. Recharging the world with green, smart energy. Charge your EV with your PV and more. Visit myenergy.com and help to spark the green revolution. My Energy, driving the charge to a greener future.
So Aviv, thank you for joining us on the Fully Charged podcast today. So let's first of all, let's start off with where are you and how are you doing? Those are always good questions to start with.
I'm doing very well. Thank you for asking. And obviously, thank you very much for having me, Helen. I live in Chicago, in the US, although I'm originally Israeli. So I spent most of my life in Israel and I moved here about 5 years ago.
And we're going to be talking about your company, Solar Simplified, and the idea that it runs on. But before we get into that, I was wondering, how did you get into all of this? Like, have you always been a renewables person or a solar person or an energy person, or have you sort of arrived here by accident?
I would say it's a little bit of both. So I am, or I used to be, way back when, an electrical engineer. That's what I studied in college. I never worked in the energy industry. I kind of went to the hardware angle, building chips and designing chips in laptops and cell phones and things of that nature. But about a decade ago, I decided I wanted to switch careers a little bit, and I left engineering and I wanted to move over to the business side, kind of learn how businesses work, strategy, finance, things of that nature. And I joined a management consulting company, kind of one of the big international firms in their Israeli office, and just accidentally. I don't know if somebody intended for that or not. A few of my projects were actually in renewable. Either helping to buy or sell existing power plants, mostly solar, because that's kind of what the biggest thing was in Israel back then. Today, obviously, they have wind and hydro and other types of stuff. So whether it was acquisitions or helping, figure out strategy or finance of these types of projects, that kind of gave me, put a foot in the door of the renewable industry. But the idea for Solar Simplified actually didn't come from the renewable space. After my previous startup here in Chicago was acquired, which was in real estate, not even the energy industry, it was a real estate software company. I was at home and COVID started. So as everybody probably remember, about a year and change, we were all locked down, terrified that, the apocalypse is coming. And
we weren't too far off, to be fair, but yeah.
That is true. And I was trying to think, what is the next thing that I want to do? Do I go back to the corporate world? Do I go back to consulting? Do I start another company? What are my next steps? And a lot of my friends were unfortunately losing their jobs or being furloughed, furloughed indefinitely. And I was trying to think, I'm at home. I have a lot of free time on my hands. And is there a way for me to try to help my friends, my family, to save a little bit of money. And so the angle actually came from there, of trying to figure out where is there a market anomaly where I can develop something fairly quickly that'll help people save even a little bit of money, even a few dollars a month. Especially when you're out of a job, every penny counts.
It's quite an interesting route, I guess, because I mean, one of the things that we do meet for very good reasons, lots of people who are enthusiastic about renewable energy for, basically for ideological reasons. They think there's a climate change problem. They want to do something about it. And one of the things that certainly we on Fully Charged keep saying, and Robert says a lot, is that, but it's just better. It's, you don't need, yes, it's good for climate reasons, but actually it's cheaper. Why wouldn't you use renewables? So it's quite interesting that you've kind of justified those statements because you came at it from that direction.
From this, yeah, exactly. And so the idea was, first of all, how do we save people money? And then the way that we figured out how to do that was because the prices of renewables is dropping, panels are more efficient, companies know how to do this already, and we kind of chose to go to the small to mid-scale route. So not the huge, enormous utility scale, hundreds of megawatts or gigawatts of installed panels, but also not rooftop. Because the problem, if you go to the edges, just from a financial standpoint, you're losing a lot of the internal efficiencies. If you're too little, if it's rooftop solar, 10 panels, 20 panels, 5 panels, something like that, there's no really efficiencies over there that you can exploit. As somebody who's, let's say, building this, you're procuring the panels in very small batches, so you don't get, a volume discount necessarily as a large power plant. Labor has to be done on each and every roof separately. Permitting has to go on each and every roof separately. Locating the roofs is individually. So that's out of the question, because financially speaking, rooftop solar is great for, maybe climate change and fighting climate change, but financially, is it helpful for society? I've seen research that, several different researchers that said, both. Some say that it does help society, some say that it doesn't. I don't know.
Context dependent, I guess you would say. Depends who you are and where you are, how much the sun shines.
Exactly. But then if you think of utility scale, first of all, the world is moving, not just in the United States, but other countries as well. The world is moving away from utilities. The world is moving into some form of privatization because governments understand, or are starting at least to discuss this, that, the utility is there as somebody who manages the grid, somebody who has an overall view of how do we do this correctly, is there to put up the guidelines, things like that, but they're not necessarily are the ones who are going to do the construction, or not necessarily are the ones who are going to find the site. So when we're thinking of utility scale, let's say 500 megawatt solar power plant, that's enormous. It's not like a 500 megawatt, wind or hydro or natural gas or things like that. It's massive. So, takes a lot of land, which, a lot of places around the world are not willing to give. And more than that, it becomes much more of a labor and kind of operations and maintenance problem than it is on construction. And the good thing that I'm thinking about in solar, and I'm seeing that with our partners who are actually building these solar power plants, is that solar is like real estate. You build it, but you don't have any tenants. You build it, it produces money. Somebody comes in once a month, once every couple of months, just to make sure everything's working correctly. Clean up the panels a little bit if there was, a dust storm or something. You don't have to work a lot on operations and maintenance. That's the good thing about it.
I've never heard solar energy is basically described as energy for lazy people before, but it sounds like that's what you're saying.
Yeah, it is. It's like being a real estate owner. That's why for me the shift was very easy, because we did real estate software before. Now we're doing software for this. But you can think about it. You built a building. It's producing rent somehow, But you don't have the headache of tenants, renters coming in, moving out, they scratch the walls, stuff like that. You don't have to deal with it. The panels are there, panels are producing the energy. As long as nothing ripped the cables, the inverters didn't break down or something like that, like everything's supposed to be okay. Sun is shining, panels should be working.
As long as the pigeons aren't pooing. So let's set some context here, just before we get into the bits that, the sort of nuts and bolts a little bit. So the fully charged audience, it comes from all over the place. I obviously know most about the UK, and we do have, our renewables level, it could be higher, but it's quite high. I think for last year it was maybe 34% of the entire electricity in this country was supplied by renewables, and that doesn't include nuclear and things like that. So in the US, what's the big picture for renewables at the moment?
Unfortunately, I think the answer is it depends. It depends on who you ask. The majority of renewables, as far as I'm aware, is actually regulated by the states. So we have 50 states in this country and a few, districts and kind of other types of municipalities. And unfortunately, each one of them creates their own rules. The federal government, and it doesn't matter who was the president before, federal government basically decide that they're going to do some overall contribution trying to drive this, mostly from, kind of a tax benefit. How do you depreciate these types of assets and what can you expense and these sorts of things? But they basically left the regulation to be done on a state-by-state level. I think right now solar, if I'm including both rooftop and solar farms or solar power plants, 8%, I believe, if I'm not mistaken.
The US. And how about other, wind energy? Because that's the other, we hear about these massive wind farms in Texas.
All
of that.
Wind is a lot larger. I would assume, I don't know, I haven't checked the statistics on wind recently, but I would assume that it's, I don't know, maybe on a national level, 20%, I would assume. Don't catch me on the word. It's probably anywhere between 20 and 40. I do know that some states it's closer to 40. And others, it's, unfortunately closer to 0 because it really depends on the plane and geography of each and every state. It does seem like the Biden administration is pushing for a lot of, on-beach / offshore wind right now. But I think everybody on my side of the industry are waiting to see what's going to happen in solar, things that are on land, solar or hydro, things of that nature.
Well, let's get to what the so the context is. There's some, but there could be more. So let's get to the idea behind Solar Simplified then, which is a new company, but there's this thing called community solar, which we don't have in the UK. But you tell us what that is and what Solar Simplified does.
Sure. So let me start maybe with a bit of background on community solar first before we dive into us specifically. Community solar is this idea that the country has vast areas of lands that are not exploited for anything. It could be farmland that was kind of overused. It could be brown fields or places that they used to dispose garbage or things of that nature that nobody uses. But it's not forest land or anything like that. You don't have to cut anything out in order to get it ready. And the idea was, how about we build a solar farm? A private company is going to get the permits, find the sites, get everything ready, build it. But instead of having the utility buy the energy, the utility will facilitate something like a credit. Think of a gift card. This solar power plant or solar farm is going to pay a portion of your bill depending on how much sun there is. But you need to choose to connect to it. Nobody's going to force you to have this. And the idea was to get the community more involved, both in the process of asking for these assets to be there in their community, whether it's a small town or whether it's a major city. But more than that, it's not just about, okay, I approve, as somebody who lives in Chicago, I approve for company, whatever, to build a solar farm in the municipal area of the city of Chicago. The idea was the regulation wanted me and everybody else to be involved, to actively make a decision. I want, not just that I want this to happen, I also want to be the customer. And the idea, at least in some of the states, and this is kind of something that we're also trying to push as a company with kind of new regulators or places where there's still discussions happening, is instead of us being just another supplier of energy, how about we would be a discount, a negative line item, and we'll be at the bottom, miscellaneous, next to the taxes and the fees and everything. Because the idea is not to compete with the utilities. Nobody wants competition. And the utilities, even though they are the incumbents, they control the grid and almost everything that's happening, don't try to compete with them. Some countries, including about half of the states in the United States, have gone through, deregulation processes where private companies are there. Germany, I think, passed that. I know in other countries in the Middle East and, Latin America. Nobody likes competition. Let's be honest. No business likes competition. So how can we do this that it works together? And I think our idea, both in community solar and in places where community solar doesn't exist, was we're going to kind of remove our brand reputation. Our brand reputation is going to get hurt a little bit because we're going to be on your bill at the utility. Utility is going to bill you. We're just going to be a negative line item at the bottom. The reason we're a negative line item is because solar is cheaper than what they're getting from the utility.
So run this. So where this works. So if you're, someone, you live in a house, you need some energy. You already have someone who supplies your electricity. So
correct.
That doesn't change. It's the same, whatever company it is, they send you a bill every month, whatever it is. But somewhere in that, and they're all local, are they, these solar farms? They're local facilities.
Yes.
So somewhere nearby you, there's what used to be a field and it's got a load of solar panels and you make some cheap energy. How
Correct.
does that get connected up with the bill?
So basically what we do is say, all electricity in the world, nobody knows, or at least nobody figured out how to track each and every electron, where they were generated, and who consumed them, which house did they get to. That's something that nobody figured out yet, just from a physics standpoint. So what's happening in the US and in other countries is kind of what's called net metering. You check the meters of all of the generators and how much each of them generated. You check all of the meters of all of the consumers, basically you and me in our house, and you kind of net them. It's a billing game of some sort. You try to the utility does that. They try to figure out how much you consumed so they could charge you. Some of that money they're going to keep, and some of that money they're going to pay the generators that are connected.
So you're selling energy to the utility company, and because it's cheaper, they then pass that discount directly on to the person who's signed up. Is that what it is?
We're kind of playing on that. So we're a software company. I don't actually own the solar farms myself. Maybe sometime down the road when we're a big company. But we're basically trying to go and encourage companies to build these solar farms because it's easier and because they can go directly to consumers. The major problem in the US, and I don't know how other markets are kind of seeing that, majority of renewables, not just solar, most of renewables in the United States are being sold to corporations. It's not being sold to you and me as customers, as the individuals. And that's okay. It happened during the 80s and the 90s because of financing problems. You couldn't get financing to build these power plants without having somebody who's creditworthy who said, I'm going to buy this after you build it. So the banks were never allowing
There have been attempts though. So I lived in America for 4 years, and when I lived in Narragansett in Rhode Island, and they had a great little system there. It was a wind-based system, but as I recall, I paid something. So I chose that utility company because they had the renewables in their mix, and I think I volunteered to pay something like 5% extra on every bill. But what that 5% did was it invested in their next wind turbine. And so the community was kind of buying its own winter. And I think you got a discount somewhere further down the line. You know, it sort of all evened out somewhere. It didn't for me because I lived there for 2 years and moved away. But it was this, and you could actually go and see the turbines. It was brilliant. Like this was the one they built last year, and then this was the one they're building next year. And there was this really nice, it was, I don't know if that counts as community wind, but it was a very local thing, and the local people could see, here's my five, you know, what my $5 on the bill, and there's the wind turbine.
Right. So the question is this: do you want? And this is, you know, it's a philosophical argument, and I don't know what's the right way to go. But do you want necessarily a monopoly, a localized monopoly, to be in charge of building something innovative? Because the assumption is the majority of utilities around the world are not renewable. You know, it's utilities who have been around for, I don't know, 50 to 100 years, probably, some maybe even slightly more. And, you know, they've been around trying to facilitate things, you know, even before electricity, some of these companies used to exist, you know, with kerosene and things of that nature. So do you want to trust a company that's, you know, it's a monopoly, it's an incumbent, they're moving slow? Or do you want to try to privatize, you know, this effort and say, okay, company A, which is a for-profit, now I think that, you know, I'm allowing you to apply to build a solar farm or wind farm.
So I tell you what, I'm struggling with a bit at the moment, because I think the way that in the UK, and I am, you know, not an expert on all the details, but we have lots of companies who supply energy, and you just pick a company. So, you know, there are companies that guarantee to supply only, you know, they build their production and they build renewables, and you can choose to buy from them because they are producing what goes in. So does that? So from what you're saying, it sounds as though the system in the US is that there is a monopoly in each local area. Is that the case, or am I missing something?
I would say it depends. So about half of the United States, you have to be with the utility. There are no private suppliers.
I mean, considering America is the country of capitalism, that's amazing, isn't it?
It is. I think it definitely, the country is definitely moving to privatization, but some states are slower than others. Again, it's on a state by state level. But even in places where there is, you know, it's been through deregulation, it's a market kind of like what you're describing in the UK. I'm saying something a little bit different. I'm saying, why don't you have both? Let's leave the electrons for a second. When you connect your house to a supplier in the UK who, let's assume that we believe them that they are 100% renewable, and they're not, you know, buying energy from a local natural gas power plant because something
that's a whole separate debate. There are some credit-like things that move around, but some of them are definitely, they have all their own wind turbines.
Right. So let's assume it is true, and you're buying 100%. Again, you can't really know if their electron came to your house or to somebody else. So in my view, we should keep on building more and more renewables, even for the people who don't want those. You know, the market for people who want to save money is a lot bigger, unfortunately, than the market of people who care about green. So when you were living in Rhode Island,
yeah,
you
that's
said?
right.
Or Long Island?
In Narragansett, where
Island.
Family Guy was set.
Okay. So when you were living there, I would assume that X% of the people cared about green and the rest of them didn't, or maybe they were ambivalent, like they didn't care too much, or, you know, not for, not against. I don't know anybody in the world who would say, I don't want to save money. Like, I'm paying $100 a month for my utility bill. I don't want to pay $90.
Depends on what the trade-off is, but yes, if all other things being equal, yeah.
All of the things being equal, I don't think anybody would say, I don't want to pay less. And that's kind of where we're playing. We're working together with the suppliers in places that have been through deregulation. And working together with the utility to facilitate this as a discount. It's at the end of the day, it's not just about your supply, because you're paying your delivery, or transmission, depending on which country you live in, and you're paying fees and you're paying taxes and you're paying a lot of other stuff that are not the electrons. I want to compete on all of that bracket, not just the electrons, not just the supply. And by doing this game of, it's almost like gamification. Instead of looking at this as electrons, we're looking at this as money. We just generated energy that's, let's say, worth $100. Instead of giving you whatever, like your $40 of energy, and I'm going to have to find a few other people to split the $100 with. If your bill was $100, I'm going to give you the full $100. It's money. That money is no longer connected to the electrons. But instead of me paying your bill, it's automatic on your bill, so you don't have to actually do anything.
So
I would just charge you $90 for it. So you would get the discount because I'm here giving you a cut.
So one of the things that I'm kind of interested in the system, just because, you said solar is cheaper than a lot of other things for these reasons. So why aren't the utility company? So one of the pushes, actually, people in the UK who are building new capacity, they're not building oil-fired power stations because it's expensive.
Right.
So they're already building renewables because it's cheaper. So why aren't the utility companies spotting the thing here and going, oh, well, we could build some solar farms and it would be cheaper for us, and then they cut you out of the system?
So there's a few reasons. I think the US market is a lot more open for competition. Again, excluding those states that are completely not thinking about that. But it's a market that really likes competitiveness. And the idea is, if just the utility builds these farms, then yes, we're going to get some product. But if we create some sort of a competition that the utility, let's say, is the facilitator, it's the judge, but they're not necessarily the player, they're not going to have an incentive to pick whatever producer A of solar panels versus producer B. They would allow everybody and anybody to compete under regulation. You want to make sure that companies do this correctly. So that's kind of one side of it. I think the second side is just from a money perspective. A utility, again, is a very heavy, very slow to move company because they have to. The last thing we want, and anybody wants, is for the lights to go out. So on their end, they don't want to move too fast on any innovation, not just renewables, any type of innovation, because they're afraid, and they should be. That's their job, to make sure the light turns on when I click, when I flip the switch. If you go to private companies and you kind of disperse this idea of we have to build, let's say, another gigawatt of solar and another gigawatt of wind, instead of having one company do that, let's have 10 or 100 or 200 companies do it in much smaller chunks. They will try to compete with each other and to beat each other at their own game. They would try to procure the panels for cheaper or get better quality panels. They would try to do the job better or faster, just from a business perspective. And so, at least as far as I understand it, from the government's mind, that will get us, further faster, if you can phrase it that way.
I guess you need quite a lot of a crystal ball to work all this out. Well, let's just get into the geography, because you're in Chicago, Illinois, that area. It's got, should we say, quite a history of heavy industry and fossil fuel use. It's not the first place you'd pick as a hotbed of renewable energy. So just, right. But then maybe if it's cheaper, it is. So I'm just curious, what's the attitude of people in that area? There was this, I guess it also became known as the Rust Belt, further, a wider area that was right. America's factory when it came to all of these right. heavy polluting industries. What's the attitude there towards renewables, and how has it shifted?
So first of all, we're actually not servicing people in Illinois, but we kind of started in the Northeast. New York, New Jersey, kind of moving inwards, mostly from an opportunistic standpoint, not necessarily because we had anything against Illinois. I think Illinois, specifically in all of the area here, again, it's very interesting. It's that you can't really see that certain types of states that are, let's say, more Republican or more Democrat are leaning towards more renewable versus less renewable when it comes to energy. a little bit of everybody. You see Democratic states and Republican states who are against it for all sorts of reasons, and others who are for it. Illinois has, I believe, about 60% comes from nuclear, and that's another complete philosophical debate of whether nuclear is considered renewable or not. But we did have a pretty nice boost of solar in the last few years. I think just recently the governor has said that he wants to put a stop to it because it was a little bit of a messy system, and he wanted to make something that, again, if you're privatizing the industry, you want to have, a levelized playing, field for everybody to play in. And he felt that it was a little bit obscure. Some companies didn't know how to participate, things like that. So they made a temporary stop. But yes, there are solar farms, both community solar as well as utility scale solar. There's wind farms here. And I think everybody is, well, I wouldn't say everybody's for it, but I think everybody understands why this is necessary. Not even just from a monetary standpoint of saving money and helping the planet. It's also extremely, extremely important from a risks management perspective. At the end of the day, this is like, and I'm sorry to go down the finance, economics kind of route, but it's a little bit like portfolio management. You'd never hear somebody, if you're asking for advice about your pension fund, for example, or your savings, you wouldn't hear any advisor that's right in their mind and has a certification to do this job that would tell you, take all of your money, put it in one stock, and pray that it's going to go up in your lifetime. Everybody says, buy a basket, spread your risk, diversify. And we need to do exactly the same in energy. Because the last thing we want is, if 100% is solar, and I really like solar, if 100% is solar, at night, nobody has electricity. Each and every type of renewable and also non-renewable has their pros and has their cons.
Well, that's interesting. So is there any storage built? Because obviously one of the things with wind and solar is that, you need the environmental conditions to be right. And the thing that goes with that is, well, that's not a problem if you have storage. And as long as you sort the storage out, then it is a constant supply. So is there storage built into the sort of systems you're running or that you're connecting up? Or is it just, it comes out of the solar panel and goes straight into the grid?
So I would say some and some. We need to remember storage is the most, and I don't know if everybody knows this, but it's the most, it's the challenge that the world is spending the most money on. If you look from a globalist perspective, I believe it's like 2 or 3x from the next bigger problem. Companies, academics, things, anybody and everybody, governments are spending more money trying to figure out a solution for storage. Now, specifically, some of our solar farms have put storage in place, others did not, kind of depending on the timeline. I think the technology is definitely moving forward. It's not there. I don't think that any, big municipality, I'm not going to even say a country, can put enough storage that will be viable both financially and energy-wise, that's going to actually be working to supply a full country throughout the night, and you can only use solar and storage. I would also say, again, from a risk perspective, on a grid level, it's the wrong thing to do. You have to have a little bit of hydro, a little bit of wind, a little bit of solar, a little bit of geothermal, a little bit of anything that your geography can withstand, so that if something happens, like we just had in Texas, where the wind blades froze, nobody thought it's going to happen, but it did. You need to have a backup. And the backup couldn't just be storage, because storage at some point it depletes and runs out.
And so how about, I guess the test of any system, so you're a relatively new company, but what the test of any system is, does it encourage the building of solar capacity that would not otherwise be built? How's all of that going?
Right. So obviously the answer is slow. Energy industry moves very, very slow. And rightfully so, I would say. I think on our end, since we're seeing both sides, I think on the consumer front, people are very excited about this. We haven't spent a lot of money on marketing, and we have over 1,000 households that are connected to us, small businesses, mom and pop shops, who are using our services, A, because they want to save money, and B, because they want to have more renewable built in their area. Because again, the connectivity here has to be fairly close. You can't put a solar farm in Texas and have it supply energy to folks in upstate New York. It needs
because
to be
of the losses,
losses
in transmission.
Exactly. Also, again, from the community standpoint, we want people to be able to drive by and see it. So it needs to be there. Otherwise, if it's too far away, you can't see it, you don't know if it's there. More of, again, the mentality around feeling a part of something. I think the bigger deal is on the developer side. Developers, these companies who are building these solar power plants, they're really excited about this because they don't have to stay in the realm of PPAs, power purchase agreements, that they would have done 5, 10, 15, 20 years ago with large corporations. Because over there, their profit margin was slim. It was tiny. And there are public companies out there, so folks, listeners can check out, the annual reports and see. And the reason for that is very simple. Fortune 1000 companies have the negotiation power over who they want to buy energy from. So they can negotiate. You and I can't negotiate as the small people here. We're being told by the utility or by the government, if the price is regulated, we're being told, your price this month was, 8 cents per kilowatt hour, something like that, or 5 cents or 10 cents. Unlike, cell phone companies or any other types of service where us as consumers, we can go to negotiate.
Never tried negotiating with a cell phone company, but I'm just not that kind of person.
That is true. But you can switch. You can't just switch electricity.
You can in England. That's why you can in the UK. That's why I'm just trying to make that point, because I think that's the default state of people who live in those countries. Like find another company, but that's not available at the moment.
Right. So from the developer standpoint, they're making more money using our service. If they're making more money, they can allow themselves to hire more people. They can allow themselves, instead of building 1 solar farm a year, to go to 2 or to go to 3. And so if we're able to generate more revenues for them, it's going to roll back into the system. And we're already seeing it with the few developers that we've been working with. I mean, keep in mind, we've just been around for less than a year. They've already increased kind of their pipeline, or bringing up their pipeline power plants that they thought they were going to build in 2022, 2023 are now being pushed forward to 2021 and early 2022. That's awesome. If they're making more money, which incentivizes them to build more renewables, that's great. That's exactly the point. We're saving money and we're contributing to more renewables. So 2 birds in one stone.
So looking at that, your perspective, I think, is quite interesting, just because, you're sort of new into this, but not new into the game of looking to optimize things. But if you were to, change one thing in the way that the US domestic energy supply, if you could change one rule, if you like, or, do one thing, what's the biggest obstacle at the moment to the uptake of renewables? Because I think the problem, there is this problem that you've already paid for an oil-fired power station or a coal-fired power station, right? And you've already paid for it. So there's this kind of, you might as well use it. And all the people who are keen on renewables are just like, look, it's cheaper and it's better. Just get on with it. Why do we have to wait? Right. What are the big obstacles in the US, and what would actually really shift the dial on this?
I think it's an interesting question. I would assume, at least on my side of the spectrum, and again, I'm not proficient on utility scale power plants, renewable or non-renewable. I think it's the regulation, not necessarily preventing things, but streamlining the process. If private companies know exactly that this is the process I have to go through, these are the requirements, if I check all of the boxes and These are the costs that are associated with checking all of these boxes. Then I'm going to be able to build a wind farm, solar farm, something in these locations, and I'm going to get paid more, or I'm going to need to pay the government less if I'm in this area, which is, let's say, more congested or needs more renewable versus that area that needs a little bit less, etc. If we streamline the process, we make it simple. That's kind of why we chose our name Solar Simplified. We're trying to make this simple. If we and the state governments and the federal government could make this simple for companies, then companies by themselves will enter this market, which will boost this forward. I personally am not a big believer in the government executing things start to finish. I think the government should be a facilitator, and that us as consumers and business owners and entrepreneurs need to kind of drive the market forward. So in my view, it's just this cloud where people and companies are just not sure what's going to happen. Okay, there's a new administration. Is it good or is it bad? Or maybe nothing's going to change. There's new states. Can you make it simple for me as a business owner to enter this market and keep pushing this industry forward? And can you make it simple enough so that the consumer understands what we're doing here? I think the biggest challenge that we have, for example, and a few other companies, Community Solar as well, is that consumers think, I can do this in addition to my supplier, which is true. But then they're saying, wait, I sign up online, takes me 60 seconds, just your information with your utility so that we know that you're you. And you say that you support renewable and you want this discount. We're basically handing away free money. People are asking questions, wait a second. Where's the catch? People are very skeptic. Why is this cheaper than what I'm doing right now? And I mean, they're right to ask that question. There have been, a lot of scams, not just.
Well, it's generally said, isn't it, that if you're not paying for it, then you are the product or something. There's that, you're the mug in the system that everyone else is taking advantage of. But that's not that. The point is that what you're doing here is you're just kind of splitting the benefits and shifting the risk around so that everyone's happy with it rather than there being obstacles. And are there people trying this in other states? Is this such a novel? Is this a? You said there's other community solar around. How big is the idea? This kind of idea of doing this kind of thing, is this taking off in America?
It is, but it's taking off slowly. It's still not, it's not a fighter jet. It's a two-person airplane, that's just flying around to show you the area. It's definitely taking off. But I think there's a lot of market education that we have to do. If people understand what this is, then they would be more enticed just internally to support this idea, because they would understand that they can save money while supporting renewables. So it is taking off. Obviously, you can see that the East Coast has been moving faster, like New York, Massachusetts, but also California on the other side. Texas is very growing. Arizona, all of the sunny states that are in the south, Nevada, etc., are definitely growing. But this idea of community solar, of folks being able to sign up for a service that's an energy service, but that's not just their supplier, that's a little bit of a more innovative approach, which is basically saying you can just sign up for two suppliers. You're just going to see them differently. You're going to see one as your supplier, and the other one is some sort of a financial game for you to save a little bit of money. But by saving money, you're pushing this industry, the renewables, forward.
You win on all fronts. Well, it sounds like a really interesting experiment, and I'm sure we'll all be keeping an eye on how that. Because I think one of the difficult things is incentive. Like, there's all sorts of things that if you were building the system from scratch, you wouldn't do it like this. But then you have to get somewhere from where you are now, and because everyone's already got structures, rules and regulations, that the path is different. So it sounds like this is a good experiment. Right. Brilliant. Well, thank you very much for joining us and for sharing all of that. That's great. So yeah, thank you.
Thank you so much for having me.
enjoyed that. I was interested to... It's amazing how hidden some of this stuff can be. You know, I lived in America for 4 years, in California and in Rhode Island and some other bits and pieces along the way, some other states, and I had no idea of how the energy system worked. Never asked the question. I was just really impressed with this wind turbine scheme that my little town Narragansett had. Well, I think it was all of that area. And actually, I even went and volunteered for them at the Newport Folk Festival, the real, actual Newport Folk Festival. I lived right next to it, and the reason I went was to talk about wind turbines. But I did get a free ticket. I think, as in 2009, I think I missed seeing Pete Seeger play by a few hours, which in retrospect was not very intelligent. But I did talk to a lot of people about wind turbines. So anyway, it's good to hear that all of these things are developing in the US. They could always be moving faster, right? So it's good that they're going in the right direction, and hopefully the new administration will help all that along. So that's it for this podcast. If you've liked it and you'd like to support us, please do subscribe to Fully Charged on Patreon, all those subscribing things. Subscribe to the podcast if you want more podcasts, that's a good thing. And the website fullycharged.show has loads of stuff on it, so have a look at all of that. And if you have been, thank you for listening.